Gazing at the letter just received from her husband Bob Lee, Melinda exclaimed to her children,
"Papa is on his way from Memphis."
The children, Daniel, Mary, and Thomas, squealed with excitement and ran around the room.
"Don't stop the beat off."
Starting as soon as he can.
Melinda read in the letter that as soon as he got close to home, he would fire 3 pistol shots in the air, so that she and the children would know for sure that Papa was home. Bob and Melinda were both born in Arkansas, both now 30 years old, married to each other for 11 years. They were very much looking forward to all of them being together again, now that the war was over. It is 1865, and word is spread far and wide between the Southern clans that Confederate hero Bob Lee was on his way home. Along the route towards his ranch, Lee Station in Fannin County, children called out as he approached, and young and old alike warmly greeted the Confederate hero with rebel yells, smiles, and laughter from the joy they were all feeling. The talk of occupation by federal forces had swept the region as well. Texas still had not formally given up the fight. 3 days later, pistol shots are heard in the near distance, Lee Station, and a subsequent holler that rattled the hills was heard.
"Melinda!"
Quick as lightning, the commotion ensued as Melinda yelled back with excitement.
"Bob is home."
The kids all ran outside with great excitement, and they were joined by his father and their clan, all elated at the sight of Bob Lee's return. Robert Jude Lee was born to Daniel Webster Lee and Mary Polly Davis Lee on September 13, 1835, at Lee Station in Fannin County, Texas. His parents were from Arkansas, and the Lee family are originally from Virginia. His father, Daniel, now lived with his second wife, Elizabeth Ward, who was originally from Illinois and whom he married in 1845 after Bob's mother, Polly, passed away the same year. Daniel's family consisted of he and his wife, Elizabeth, and 10 of his children ranging from 2 to 21 years of age, all born in Arkansas or Texas. Bob resided on property adjacent to Daniel's ranch, both referred to as Lee Station. 3 counties converged on their land, Fannin, Hunt, and Collin County. The Lees had survived the war better than most, for a stash of gold the family had brought with them originally from Virginia. Bob and the other family men that had served in the Civil War had the luxury of always having good boots and clothing, thanks to his mother and father. It has been said that Daniel's ranch had prospered through the war years when men were away and the livestock unattended. He had been called a horse thief and a cattle rustler. Whether he was or wasn't isn't completely clear, but speculation remains today that most likely he had been bending the rules a bit. As for Bob Lee, he had served the Confederacy well, with his involvement as attached to the Texas State Troops and Company C of the 9th Texas Cavalry. He had served with the cavalry under General Ben McCulloch, Albert Pike, Earl Van Dorn, Henry Forney, Henry Little, N.B. Forrest, and J.B. Whitfield. They had fought at Pea Ridge, Wilson's Creek, Elkhorn Tavern, Corinth, Vicksburg, Nashville, Murfreesboro, Missionary Ridge, and the Siege of Atlanta. Bob was never held captive. He remained in good health and presented an air of confidence and prowess. When he returned, people referred to him as Captain Bob Lee. He perhaps had earned that rank with his men, but as far as the Army was concerned, they never made that formal. He was in the end a sergeant who had reported AWOL on the final roll call. I suppose that once he heard officially that the war was over, he took it literally and hightailed it out of there and grabbed whatever he could on the way. Apparently, bending rules runs in the family. Bob returned with wealth compared to others returning from 4 long years of war. It is most likely that Bob received a temporary command as a captain, as a special detachment of scouts for the purposes of securing horses in the war for the military operations in the Mississippi campaigns. This field assignment and rank given by the ranking officer at the time. In 1860, the country was struggling with the expansion of the territories and those vying for statehood. The looming question throughout the states was the question of how to cohabitate with opposing views on slavery and states' rights. A struggle between the powers that emerged from the Industrial Revolution of the North and the peculiar agricultural dynasties that prevailed in the South. What would be the future if the status quo remained divided amongst the states? Each new state admitted brought additional strength to those questions and others. Those divisions manifested throughout the country, every city, village, and hamlet, even divided families at the dinner table. Once the fever pitched and the resolutions could no longer be agreed upon, the succession began formally. When the question hit the Texas legislature, the prospect of secession from the Union was greatly divided. Governor Sam Houston pleaded against leaving the Union. At a special convention held in Austin, called on behalf of the governor in July of 1861, The convention voted overwhelmingly in favor of secession in the February 1st vote, 166 to 8. The statewide referendum held on February 23rd resulted in only 18 of the 122 counties voting against secession. Therefore, on March 2nd, Texas became the 7th state to secede from the Union, this occurring long before Lincoln could even take office. After the war began, with the firing on Fort Sumner at Charleston, South Carolina, 4 more states joined the Confederacy. As one might expect, the more industrial areas of Grayson and Collin counties voted strongly against secession, while the more rural areas of the 4 counties, namely Hunt and Fannin counties, were decisively split down the middle, for and against leaving the Union. For the men left behind in North Texas, those who were ineligible to fight, or those who were exempted for one reason or another, these men faced other challenges: how to continue providing and supporting for their families and communities in a much divided atmosphere. Some Northern sympathizers were seen as outcasts and unpatriotic to the Southern cause, and some would lose their very lives over it. Factions naturally formed as like-minded people ferreted out who was who among them. Secret meetings occurred, and for those able to serve but just not wanting to, many took to the thickets and brush, hiding away to keep from being forced into service. Of the Union loyalists present in North Texas, some began organizing efforts to support the Union, and great hatred developed between both sides. Once the war had concluded and the Union men considered the prospects of Confederates returning home in the coming months, Union League leaders and Freedmen Bureau agents gathered to plan a path towards ensuring the new laws of the land. One such leader rose to prominence in Grayson County at Pilot Grove. His name was Lewis Peacock. He was one of the most outspoken political leaders in the area and became the foremost leader of the Union League headquartered in Pilot Grove. Lewis Peacock was born to John and Delia Hayworth Peacock, April 23, 1824, in Gulford County, North Carolina. Shortly thereafter, family moved to Washington County, Georgia, where he grew up and attended school. It was there that he met his first wife, Emmeline Benson. They married on December 15, 1846, and within 2 years had their first child, Belinda Catherine, 1848, and John Edgar, 1852. Living in Saundersville, Lewis applied his trade as a blacksmith, wheelwright, and wagon maker while farming. By 1858, the family had migrated to Texas, settling in Grayson County near Pilot Grove. Lewis homesteaded 160 acres of land about 3 miles south-southeast of Pilot Grove, on the Grayson and Fannin County lines. It was near the Tate Place, and one border of Peacock's land was adjacent to Parson Gentry's farm south. After the war broke out, Peacock was exempt for his trade as a blacksmith and wheelwright. He thus remained a citizen and continued working to support his family as the war raged on. Once the war had ended, Lewis began working specifically as a guide to the Union troops and Freedmen Bureau agents, which was a dangerous prospect considering he lived amongst the enemy, and the authorities provided little protection, being stationed at Sherman and Greenville as agents, and a detachment of federal troops at Sherman. Pilot Grove and vicinity were completely unprotected. Robberies and murders of freedmen and Union loyalists were common in the area. For Lewis Peacock and others, Bob Lee was a problem. He stood against everything they had been trying to achieve. For the Union League members, the consensus was that Bob Lee had to go. Shortly after Bob's return, he decided one morning to ride into Pilot Grove. There he was met with admiration by some and scorn by others. Real quick he determined that the air was thick with turmoil. Once congenial citizens were staunchly divided, even here in this small little burg of a town. Feeling somewhat dejected and overall just not feeling well, Bob returned to Lee Station and told Melinda of his experience that day. He seemed troubled by the atmosphere and warned Melinda of impending trouble. Late one night, while extremely sick in bed, a knock on the door by federal soldiers awoke the family. It was announced that Bob was under arrest for war crimes committed during the Civil War, and that he would be taken before the judge in Sherman. Under duress, Bob pleaded with the company that his illness would only get worse traveling to Sherman at night in the damp air. The troops, having their orders, commanded Bob to get up and get dressed. They were taking him to Sherman one way or another. Bob's brother John was summoned to accompany his brother to take care of the sick man as best he could on the journey, and his brace of fine ivory-mounted pistols were seized. A small detachment secured their prisoner to his horse and rode out to Lee Station heading north. After several miles, another group of citizens joined the detachment en route to Sherman. Of the soldiers present, Bob recognized Lewis Peacock, Jim Maddox, and most likely Henry Boren. Of the citizens who joined the party, Bob recognized Doc Wilson. As they rode along, Doc struck up a conversation with Bob, telling him not to worry, that all this could be worked out, ultimately stating that if he would just pay a ransom, all would be forgiven, and he would forego any charges awaiting him in Sherman. This notion inflamed Bob to no end. It was clear to him that at this point he was dealing with a bunch of robbers, and that none of them were Union soldiers. Defiant, he professed that under no circumstances that he would pay anything to the kidnappers, and demanded they continue to Sherman, where he would make his case against any charges levied against him. Unabashed by the stubbornness of Lee, Doc suggested to John Lee that Bob was making this harder than it needed to be. Once the party had reached the Choctaw Creek bottoms, an encampment was made, a guard attached to Lee, and the group settled down at a spot off the main road to let things play out. After 36 hours of breathing in cool, damp air for 2 nights in a row, Bob was getting sicker by the minute. His brother implored him to make a deal with Doc Wilson to end this predicament. Lee agreed to surrender his mule, saddle, and bridle, $20 in gold in his pocket, and to sign a promissory note of $2,000 backed by him and his father's assets. Once the document was signed, Lee and his brother were let go, and they made their way back to Lee Station. The whole situation just made Bob and his brother angry. By the time they got back, they determined, along with their father Daniel, that they would fight the matter in court. For Bob, this was an act of war, a direct assault on his family and their well-being. Lee filed suit at Bonham, the county seat of Fannin County. Thanks for watching.
Stay tuned for part 2.